Or they don't say anything in seminary about needing to stay in marching shape. So welcome to Second Halloween, our post-Halloween Halloween service, like second breakfast for hobbits, only with trunk or treating. Our appropriately seasonally spooky title for today's service is called Living with Ghosts, because we are rounding out October's monthly theme of ancestors. And we began the month of October talking about Unitarian Universalist ancestors. Today we're going to be talking about personal ancestors, the ghosts of the past who are still very much with us. William Faulkner famously said, "The past isn't dead, it isn't even past." Which is to say, we are all of us born into the middle of a complex story that's been being told for a very long time. We are born into the tale of our ancestors. Our parents, biological or adoptive, their parents, their communities, their culture, their circumstances. As we grow, we are inescapably marked and shaped by that inheritance in a myriad of ways, conscious and unconscious. One of the tasks of becoming an adult is to examine our own story so that we can learn to shape it, to disentangle the threads of our personal narrative from the larger narrative of our family and our ancestors and all that came before. And in the process, perhaps we can learn to identify what are the deep values of our history, of the tales and the traditions that come to us. What would we gladly be rooted in, and what would we like to free ourselves from? What are the patterns that resonate with us, and what are the patterns accidentally learned and repeated from which we might better be freed? Now, this semester as a seminarian, I was required to take a class, I'm in the middle of a class, that has asked me to go deeper into my own family roots, to better understand my own ethnicity as an Anglo-Scottish-German-Canadian, and to really trace the transmission of values and attitudes down through the generation. And it has been really fascinating to discover how much of what I think of as myself is actually an expression of something that is much larger and older than me, to examine the larger fabric of my family and my culture into which and out of which I am woven. It was interesting to learn, for example, that certain traits about my own emotional makeup and how my family communicates about feelings, or doesn't communicate about feelings, how certain traits that I have always found a little bit vexing, that I thought were just like peculiar to me and my family, were actually just what you would call being really, really German. It was also fascinating to see how specific stories would repeat themselves down through the generations, even though each of those stories was just the product of individuals making their own decisions in their own unique historical context. Still, these patterns would repeat. For example, on my mom's side, my great-grandfather's family immigrated from Scotland to Canada in 1912. The family legend is that he was supposed to come across on the Titanic, but missed it or couldn't get tickets or whatever. I would imagine a lot of families have this story. It's like just this side of possible if you look at the facts, but anyway, my great-grandpa was a first-generation immigrant living as a young boy on a farm in Canada. Only farming was not really the life for him. So when the war broke out, World War I that is, he snuck off and he joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. His parents were not pleased. The government sent him down to Texas so he could train with a bunch of American Air Force pilots. Apparently there was quite a lot of culture shock being a good Scottish-Canadian Presbyterian farm boy, all of a sudden in Austin, surrounded by American airline pilots who have kind of a different way of doing things. He flew his first mission over Belgium. He was shot down, survived, made his way back home to Canada, and settled into life as a farmer, where he had my grandma. But farming was not the life for my grandma, so when the war broke out, World War II that is, my grandma snuck away from home at 17 and joined the Canadian Nursing Corps. Her parents were not pleased. She earned her way up to the rank of sergeant, and one day at a USO dance, she met a very handsome American GI, and when the war shortly ended, she left her homeland and came to the Midwest so she could marry this American boy that she had known for all of a few weeks. Her parents were not pleased. So my grandma was also an immigrant from Canada to the U.S., and she kept her Canadian citizenship all of her life. She only became an American citizen after 9/11, when she thought she might have trouble getting back into the country if she didn't. So 2 generations of military service on both sides of my family came to an end with my parents' generation and the Vietnam War. It's also very interesting to see where and why these patterns break. My aunts and uncles did not serve in that conflict. My parents did not serve in that conflict. For the most part, they expressed the family penchant for rebelliousness, fighting for big causes, and horrifying one's parents by rejecting the conservative Catholicism in which they were raised and joining the counterculture. Because this was the 60s. My parents, on the other hand, who came of age in the early 60s instead of the late 60s. So by the time the late 60s came around, they were busy being like parents and working and trying to raise little babies. They expressed their countercultural rebelliousness by founding a small independent free school in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where all of us kids were raised on peace studies, anti-racism, feminism, ecology, and free thinking, alongside the 3 R's. So when I was a little kid, I had atheists, hippies, feminists, and communists for grade school teachers. When I discovered Unitarian Universalism in my 30s, it was like coming home to elementary school in a good way. In a good way. And what is carried through the generations, although it expresses itself differently depending on the context, is a certain rebelliousness, a desire to make one's own way in the world, and a strong civic sense that one ought to get involved and contribute in one's community. That life ought to have a larger purpose and be about something. And that life is about fighting for important causes. Those values are stamped all over me and my brother's lives, and I'm very proud of them. What we also inherited was a certain uprootedness. My great-grandpa and my grandma were both first-generation immigrants. My people are spread all over the place. Where other families might make a deliberate virtue of staying close to home, we travel where our life takes us. And to me, that attitude is as natural as breathing. You grow up and you leave your hometown. You go off and you make an adventure of your life. Granted, I didn't even make it out of Indiana, but that was the idea anyway. And that idea has a cost. It has a cost. So now as an adult, I mourn the brothers that I only see once a year because we live in different cities and those cities are not close. And I mourn the nieces and nephews who are little miracles that I hardly know. Even with technology, right? There's only so much you can do. So when I hear about families where everyone stayed in the same town and they have like regular meals together every weekend and everyone is in everyone's business and everyone gets to be someone's favorite aunt or uncle, I feel envious, to be honest. There's a pang there of what I've missed out on. So family is where we learn how to do family. Are there any parents in the room? Good. Anyone currently raising kids or have formerly raised kids? Good. Okay, so show of hands if you've ever said something to one of your kids and immediately thought, wow, I sounded just like my dad. Or I sounded just like my mom. How did you feel when that happened? Right? Did you feel proud? Did you feel a little mortified? Did you feel like I'm a chip off the old block? Or did you feel like I never thought those words would come out of my mouth? Or maybe a little of both. Here's a pro tip for you young married couples. There is never really a good time to say to your wife or partner, that's interesting. You sounded just like your mother there. Little free advice from me to you. Our identities are so shaped by our families that there can be a push-pull. We feel a gratifying sense of continuity in seeing our place in the generational line, and there's a deeper visibility and understanding of our own self when we can connect ourselves to the stories that came before. But at the same time, we want to individuate ourselves, and we don't necessarily just want to be repeating all of the patterns of the past. So go where your life takes you is a value that Suzanne and I learned on both sides of our family, and we have lived it and we have imparted it to our own children. And they have also already experienced some uprootedness in their lives, which I won't talk about because that's not my story to tell. But Suzanne and I have begun to recognize and talk about these patterns of disconnection that we have seen in our own life and the cost that it has had to us. And so we try to be deliberate now about also modeling for our girls the importance of family closeness and connection over the lifetime. We preach to our daughters all the time about sisterhood and the importance of being there for each other, and we encourage them to practice these values. They're all in Bloomington right now at IU, so if one of them gets sick, we're like, go to the store, get some soup, get some Dayquil, bring it to your sister, like you are going to be taking care of each other for the rest of your lives. Probably it really annoys them, but this is what we're doing. But the point is, everyone is born into these family patterns, and when we're aware of them, we can better choose how to live with them, or into them, or around them. Family is where we learn what the definition of family even is. And this has a strong cultural component. Some cultures, like mine, tend to very narrowly define family in terms of close blood relatives and really focus on the nuclear family and like immediate layer out. Other cultures tend to be more expansive, and they incorporate into the concept of family even close friends and others who have made a commitment to the group. Right? So the word cousin in many families is used much more broadly than it is in my own, than just to denote blood relations. Any honored older family acquaintance may become an aunt or an uncle or a tia or a tio. As an aside, I went looking to see if there is a gender-neutral or non-binary term yet for aunt or uncle that is commonly accepted, and there is not. There's pibbling for parent-sibling. There's Amr, which is like a computer programming term. Those are gaining some currency. Nieces and nephews are sometimes called nibblings, which I think we can all agree is fantastic. But the language is still evolving here, but I did go looking. Some cultures, especially Asian cultures, include in the family everyone who has ever been a part of that family, living and dead. So it's an enormous, expansive concept of family. And those honored ancestors may be given a voice in current decision-making. They have a place at the table along with the living. Some cultures are very forward-looking in their conception of family, and they pay close attention to the impact of decisions on the ancestors to come. For example, we have the Iroquois philosophy that says one ought to consider the impact of one's actions on the next 7 generations of ancestors. And that concept always seemed admirable, but also daunting to me, because how do you think 7 generations ahead? So in researching the origin of that concept, I will share with you that I found an article by David E. Wilkins, who is a citizen of the Lumbee Nation and a professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota. And he argues that this 7 generations is a little bit misinterpreted. He says what the 7 generations that you tend are the 3 who came before, the current generation, and the 3 who came after. So when you think with the 7 generation focus, you're going backwards and forward. We care for and honor and tend the memory and stories of our great-grandfathers, grandmothers, great-grandparents. And looking forward, we act with care and wisdom and forethought for our great-grandchildren. And this seems very balanced and sensible to me, so I offer that up to you for consideration. And I can tell you that learning the stories of my own great-grandparents, which I'm just beginning to do, has been really illuminating and nourishing for my own spirit. So if you don't know those stories and you have a way of finding them out, I encourage you to do that. Our families are an unchosen tribe. There are unchosen tribes. So I also want to acknowledge that sometimes the full development of our person can only happen in the context of a chosen tribe. Our friends, the group of people that we find and call our own on purpose. Because not everyone has a supportive, nurturing family, and so on. Our families can be nurturing in some respects and stifling in others. So sometimes our friends are the first people to tell us that we are beautiful without judgment or expectation in a way that we can actually hear it. So I want to hold up for those of us for whom our family are the friends who tell us that we're beautiful and we can hear it, and really honor that. I also want to honor that some people are living with a legacy of disruption from their ancestors, particularly people who were brought to this country as enslaved people and native people who, having been removed from their land, were then deliberately assimilated and Christianized as children. So it can be an especially spiritually urgent question to identify and reconnect to the ancestors when possible, or to create a new family and a new lineage when that connection cannot be reestablished. So we're entering a time of year that generally involves a lot of family gatherings, right? We're coming up on Thanksgiving and Christmas and all of those seasonal holidays of this time of year, Hanukkah, etc. And that can be great, or that can be really complicated. You might want to do a little pre-holiday prep work by reflecting on your place within the family tradition and what it has given you and how it has shaped you. If you're a journaler, this might be a good time to do some journaling. You might set aside some time to trade memories with a relative or a partner or a friend and ask questions to bring your remembering to a deeper place. In remembering, we might recall the simple acts of kindness and generosity, the hugs, the kisses, the shared wisdom, the shared meals. You might ask yourself, what are the most important things that I learned from my family that I really want to hold up so that we can come to better appreciate our own strengths by connecting with our roots? And then what are the lessons that are not so great, that have not withstood the test of time? And in this way, we may better appreciate our own failings and foibles by seeing where we learned them. And this might be the first step towards releasing ourselves from their grasp. Undoubtedly, if we look carefully at our family history, we will find good things, bad things. We may see patterns of behavior that made sense once upon a time but no longer do. We may see patterns of behavior that cannot possibly have served anyone at any time ever. And that is also a part of family, because all families are the inheritors of human failings. All families have their share of bad stories, tragedies and trauma, buried or half-buried secrets. So we might have a complicated relationship with our family history, and it's good to be able to name that and own that. But whether our relationship to our family is straightforward and positive or complicated and mixed, we may yet find that connecting to our ancestor stories can be an opportunity to tap deep wells of gratitude, because we are going to encounter people who took great risks to build a better life for their family, which is now our better life. We're going to meet people who bucked the conventional wisdom or the easy complacency of their day, who made their own way and who helped open the way for us. We may meet people who endured under the most difficult of circumstances so that we could have our own life, who fought for their right to a future which is now our present. And reckoning with our ancestor stories will also mean reckoning with our nation's complicated history around which families were honored and nurtured and supported and welcomed, and which families were marginalized or persecuted or culturally suppressed. How has our family's history, for better or worse, intersected with the history of white supremacy in this culture, in this country, with the history of native assimilation, with slavery, with xenophobia? How did women in our family understand and pursue their opportunities? How were alternative sexualities or gender expressions celebrated or suppressed? In the anxiety of the current political moment, it almost appears as if our nation is emptying itself out of every traumatic collective historical pattern all at once. If it is just all being surfaced all at once. We see it in the rhetoric of racism, of xenophobia, of cultural purity and cultural protection. We see it in the national emergence of a conversation around sexual violence directed at women. We see it in this sudden floating of a proposition to erase transgender people out of existence legally. We see it in the reemergence of violent anti-Semitism, the disenfranchisement of Native American voters. These are all old ghosts that have been haunting this country for a very long time. Like all old family patterns, they need to be named and owned before they can get changed. We will never get beyond the collective trauma of our nation's violent history until we can say plainly that the past isn't dead, it isn't even past. We are seeing that with a vengeance today. And one possibility is that the resurfacing of all of these issues represents an opportunity to confront and heal them. Finally, to heal them. But if that is going to be, we are going to have to get very real about owning those patterns in our own families and in our own selves. Because they live through history, which means they live through us, and we are all connected to it. Living with ghosts is always a complicated mixture of gratitude and lament. Honoring our ancestors means understanding and naming and owning the full complexity of their humanity, their gifts and their frailties, including the ways in which their gifts and frailties live on in us. So I'm going to ask that we begin to do that honoring and that naming in a small way now together. Then we'll close the service. So I ask that you call to mind the image of your ancestors, either real or as you imagine them to be. Let's just take a breath together. Call to mind your ancestors. In the spirit of love, in the spirit of peace, may we honor their memory. May we honor their unique strengths, talents, quirks, and capabilities, many of which we see in ourselves. Their bodies are gone, but we are the continuation of their bodies. May we honor with gratitude the gifts they have given us, the sacrifices they have made for us, the work done, the pleasures deferred. May we be wise stewards of the treasures they have stored and passed down to us. The time of their work has passed, but we are the continuation of their striving. May we honor their wisdom. May we remember their lessons, the hard-won truth of their experience, the knowledge accumulated over many lifetimes. Their time for speaking is past, but their words live on in us and through us. May we honor with humility their failings. They were people like us, imperfect, frail, subject to the shortcomings of their own time and their own upbringings. We ask for compassion for their humanity, knowing that we will fail in turn. We ask for relief for our own hurts. We ask for healing. We ask for release from the cycles of trauma that exist in all families. May we honor with courage their hope for the future, their vision for a better world which has been entrusted now to us. We are not bound by the particulars of that vision, but may we be worthy of its spirit. Their time for dreaming is past, but we are the living embodiment of their dreams. In remembering our ancestors' dreams, their strength and their sacrifices, may we come to a deeper place of faith in our own gifts and capacities and a deeper determination to build a better world for the next generation. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.